Okay, so welcome everyone to the module on the EU. I'm going to try to not make it too boring. I'm going to try to not make it too long. We're basically just going to go once through the different kind of competences that the EU has or that exist through the legislative process and through some other institutions that might turn out useful at some point during the chairing process. So I'm going to quickly share the link to the Miro in here. I think that's it. But I'm also going to start screen sharing now. So if you prefer to just lie back, you might as well do so. Okay, so this is my Miro board. I don't have the great graphic design skills, so please forgive me for this not being too fancy schmancy. But yeah, I tried my best. So as you can see, the three categories that I talked about, so the competences, the legislative process, and some other institutions, all of them are complemented with quite some links. So that's why I think it's useful that you guys have the link to the Miro board. You can click on those at a certain point if you want. You can look back at it during committee work. If you ever get lost, if ever your delegates come up to you with something like, oh, we don't know who's responsible here, and you're like, damn, I also don't. Don't worry if that happens. I think it has happened to everyone. You know, I'm not a law student. I'm also not a European studies student. I did not know how the EU works for really long. I still don't. I looked up a lot of this I looked it up online again today because it's just very easy to get lost in all of these technical terms. So there's no shame in having to look this up, but it's easier if you know where to look it up. So that's also what we're trying to get at today. And I think one of the first and most important things to know when you're chairing a certain topic is what kind of competence it falls under. So basically, there are three different types of competences in the sharing of powers between the European Union and the member states. The first one is that the European Union has exclusive competence. So that means the European Union is the only one or the only institution that draws up legislation here, and member states may only do so if it is very explicitly stated. So an example is the customs union. So if the European Union wants to impose, I don't know, tariffs on, let's say, American steel, this is an EU decision. This is not a member state decision. A single member state cannot do that. There are also parts of the fisheries agreement, which are an exclusive competence of the European Union. So also in there are some areas, I think it was, preservation of marine wildlife, where only the EU can draft binding legislation and the member states cannot. Then the second, the kind of tier below it, are the shared competences, where member states may draft legislation, and if the EU does not do that. So that includes, for instance, the environment, that includes energy policy, that includes, what else did I write? I wrote environment twice. Well, smart. Yeah, so shared competence, it sounds, it's quite self-explanatory. The EU and the member states may both draft legislation, and in particular, the member states may only draft legislation if the European Union leaves the room for it, or specifically states that this is something to be determined by the member states. And then the last kind of competences are the competence for the EU to support, coordinate, or supplement action of the member states. So these are really fields where the European Union cannot force member states to harmonize their legislation. That includes health, that includes culture, that includes education. Here, the European Union cannot simply say, oh, school should be, you know, only 10 years in every member state. This would be harmonizing national legislation. The EU is not allowed to do that in this field. So here it can only support, coordinate, or supplement. So the EU can say, we're going to give a bit of money to every member state to, you know, improve digitalization at high schools or something. But the EU could never say every school needs to have at least 5 laptops. Even though that would be great, that would be harmonizing legislation. To find out what kind of fields or what kind of competence your committee topic falls under, you can just go to this link. So here you find out a lot more about the competences. They're also defined a bit more. Here you see them all listed again, and you also see which kind of fields fall under which kind of competence. So this is really your first page of reference if you need or want to find out who is responsible. And also down here, there's a bit more stuff explained if you ever have questions on the legal process within the EU, you're going to find some of your answers here. Yeah, so that was mostly it already on competences. Is there a question so far? Yeah, so this has also been set out in the TFEU, so the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. While it is a bit technical, it is very interesting if you're into law and stuff. And it also explains very well how the EU is built up, especially the first few articles. They also elaborate on these kind of competences. Sometimes you find something useful in there to know who is now actually the EU responsible, or are the member states, or is it both? So yeah, that might be something to look into as well. But in general, this link here on the left should be everything you need to get a first grasp of how your own topic is set legally. Okay, then we're going to move on to the legislative process, which is always a bit tedious. We did it in high school, and I remember that everyone hated doing this. We also did it for Germany. But you always have these nice flow charts, and I cut out a lot of it. But again, there is a very beautiful link up here in the right corner, which describes the whole procedure. So including, what happens if it gets rejected the first time? What happens if a law gets rejected at this point or at that point? And where does it go back to? So if you need the details, that's what you're going to find over here. It's explained in a very nice graph. But in general, what I think is more important for you to know is which institution is responsible, because we're, of course, always referring to some kind of institutions in our clauses. So that's what I'm mainly going to focus on. So the legislative process of the EU. As you might know, the European Commission is still the only institution that can initiate legislation, which basically means no law is going to happen within the EU if the European Commission does not want it to. Well, that sounds harsh. There are, of course, still ways for citizens, for parties, for politicians to, complain and ask for the Commission to draw a law to get this whole process rolling. That's what we're going to start with. Basically, while only the European Commission can initiate and kind of is the first determining actor that we have, of course, the law can at the very basic start through citizens' initiatives. It can start through, I think it was a quarter of the member states agreeing that legislation is needed on a certain field. The council can, on which I'm going to elaborate further, the council can invite the European Commission to initiate a law. The parliament may very well do so too. So we're having several actors, but the essential point is all of them need to address the Commission, because the Commission is the only one that can actually start the process of making a new European Union law. So the European Commission. The European Commission is basically the executive branch of the European Union. There are 27 commissioners, so that is one commissioner per member state. However, the commissioners are not meant to represent their country. So it's not really, I'm the commissioner of Germany, I'm going to represent only German interests now. So this is not the thought process behind it. How it looks in reality, that's always a different situation, but essentially these 27 commissioners are not meant to represent their own countries, but more they're meant to form this kind of executive head of government of the EU, kind of. As I said, it is the only body that can initiate legislation. To make the Maya more fun, I put a funny picture of Ursula von der Leyen on the right, who is the head of commission. Yeah, she used to be Minister for Defense in Germany, so there are a lot of pictures like her with guns and stuff. The European Commission is your main actor. In most of what you want to do, in EYP, you want a legislative process to start. Now you know that only the European Commission can start this. So that is why the European Commission is such a frequent actor in the operative clauses of the resolutions. So whenever a new law should be drafted, Also, whenever the budget should be made, the European Commission is the one who's responsible. So also, whenever you're not really sure who to call upon, the European Commission is usually a good guess. So one of the most important actors, important to understand what they're doing, but also important to understand what they're not doing, because they're, of course, not the only ones involved in the legislative process. And it's not because the European Commission proposed a law that it is actually going to pass, because there are, of course, several steps to it. So the next step is then that whatever the European Commission has drafted, it needs to pass usually both the Council and the Parliament. We're going to start with the Parliament because, well, we're the European Youth Parliament. Let's give it some priority. So as you might know, or as the name Parliament might give away, the European Parliament is elected by all EU citizens in terms of 5 years. At the moment, the European Parliament has 705 delegates or members, and it is organized in several committees. So those are also, of course, those that we're simulating in the European Youth Parliament, you know, like the Econ Committee and the AFCO Committee and stuff. But the actual European Parliament is also organized in those committees, in which delegates or members of the European Parliament, so the MEPs, gather to discuss certain issues. So what happens when the European Commission proposes a draft for some kind of legislation is that it's going to go into the Parliament, it's going to go into the responsible committee, it is discussed there, amendments may be proposed, but in the end, the European Parliament has to vote and has to accept the draft that has been made by the European Commission. It may also, of course, hand it back to the Commission if it says we're not satisfied with the work that has been done here. We think this point needs more elaboration. We think this over here is not good. And then it goes a bit back and forth. But in the end, no law can happen if the European Parliament does not agree. The guy on the left is the current president of the European Parliament, David Sassoli. I had the hardest time finding a funny picture of him, but I think he at least has a cute smile over here. Yeah. The other institution that needs to agree if a law should pass or if it should, enter into force is the Council of the European Union. So we're going to see a lot of councils today, but the Council of the European Union is very often also called the Council of Ministers, and this is how I mostly remember it, because it has nothing with EU in it, so that's already something apart. It's very often also only called the Council, which makes it even more confusing because there are 2 other councils. But this is actually one of the most important ones, the Council of Ministers. Council of Ministers because it is made up of the member states' ministers for whatever topics on that agenda. So that also means that the Council of Ministers does not have one specific configuration. So it always depends on what topic is being discussed. There is the configuration where all the, let's say, foreign affairs ministers of all the member states come together, or all the agriculture ministers of all the member states. So I think, there are 10 different configurations depending on the topic, but essentially it's always the ministers for that matter of all the member states that come together and discuss this certain point. So now you see there's one minister for each member state. It's all the ministers of one specific area. This is the point where the member states are actually meant to be represented. So while it is a similar configuration than in the Commission, here we really explicitly have the idea of this is where the member states' opinions are supposed to be represented. There's no real. So the presidency of the council is rotating. There's always a trio for every 18 months, and then they split it up amongst themselves for 6 months. In the current 18-month, it's I think at the moment it is Slovenia, or it's about to change. Anyways, in the current 18-month period, it was Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia who were presiding over the council. But it's essentially not that important because, 6 months are a short period of time, especially when we're talking about legislative processes. But yeah, I've also dropped another link over here for the different configurations, so you can look them up if you ever want to find out if something very relevant has been recently decided that regards your topic. So then you can see what the ministers have talked about or agreed upon or not agreed upon. But overall, within this process, the important part is that the council here plays a similar role to the parliament, namely, if there is if there's a draft for a new law and it has been put forward by the commission, then the council, in most of the cases, needs to agree just as much as the parliament does. So both the council and the European Parliament are kind of checking on the work of the commission. Both can, comment, discuss, amend the draft that has been put forward. They can return it back to the commission. They can ask for changes, and no law can enter into force if they don't both agree. There are some exceptions where only one of these two institutions needs to agree, but those are rather special cases, and in most of the times, both the council and the European Parliament need to agree with what the commission has put forward. Yeah. So as I said, this in more color and detail and in radio graphics, you can find in the link up right here. But essentially, I think it's really good to know that the commission is at the head of this. They're at the start of this. Whatever you want to create new or bring new into the European Union, it will at a certain point pass the European Commission. So that's why it is one of our most important actors. But there's this checks and balances where both the Parliament and the Council need to agree upon it. Any questions on that matter?
No.
Okay. Great. Well, then I guess we're gonna move on to some more institutions. Fun. But as I said, keep in mind, these three up here are really the most important ones. Also, if you still want to do research on your topic, these are the first three that I would look at if there has been something going on, because most of the times the others, you don't truly need them. Yeah, so this is kind of a very important corner of this Miro. For the rest, it's more some kind of interesting side information. Yeah, so I've also just wanted to give you a short intro into a few other important institutions. Considering that we're an Azerbaijani session, I think an important institution that is worth knowing about is the Council of Europe, because that actually goes beyond the borders of the EU and beyond the borders of the European Economic Area. So the Council of Europe has 47 members, which also include countries like Turkey, like Russia, like Azerbaijan, like a lot of the Balkan countries, Switzerland, Norway, a lot of non-EU countries are in there. And that's why it's very often a suitable actor if you're looking at taking action outside of the European Union. The downside is that the Council of Europe cannot make binding laws. So of course, it's not as tight-knit as the European Union is. However, it still has the power to enforce international agreements. So whatever international agreement the Council of Europe collectively agrees upon, that basically becomes something that they can also enforce in case one of their members acts against that. One of their most important internal agreements is the European Convention on Human Rights. And the Council of Europe also has a body for that, which enforces that, which is the European Court of Human Rights. So there is actually some leverage over there where the Council of Europe can say, okay, one of our members is not sticking to this human rights agreement, and we can therefore pull them in front of the European Court of Human Rights. So in that sense, there is some area for taking action, but of course it is a lot less than within the European Union, where there is a whole part of the legislation which is legally binding. So I think that's an important one to keep in mind if your topic is dealing with countries outside the EU. Might also always be worth looking at whether the Council of Europe has come up with some cool ideas on your topic. because after all EU countries are, of course, also Council of Europe countries. Since I've already talked about the court, I'm going to go a bit more niche. So there's also the European Court of Justice, which is basically the chief judicial authority of the EU. That means it oversees application and interpretation of EU law, which means if I disagree with the European law and I say this paragraph in the treaty of the whatever, that is violating my rights as a citizen, the European Court of Justice is where I refer to. So it kind of makes sure that it has to rule whether the European law is justifiable. So it is, yeah, I've also written a note that it is very rarely used in EYP, which is true. Some jury topics deal with the European Court of Justice, but essentially it is not an actor that is relevant for a lot of subjects. Still, it's good to know that the European Court of Justice exists. Then, well, the European Central Bank, which is in Frankfurt, by the way, where I'm from. So I still wanted to, you know, give some touristy vibes for Frankfurt here, because Frankfurt's not rich enough with all its financial sector yet. So the European Central Bank is, as you might guess from the name, the central bank for the euro. So it governs over the whole monetary policy of the eurozone. It's an actor that is mainly relevant for the eurozone countries. It sets the target's interest rates. It oversees how much money there is in the economy. All of these things are rather technical. They are very important though for a few topics, but mainly for econ topics. So if that is your topic, then you might pay a lot of attention to the European Central Bank. However, if it is not, you mostly can forego it. Yeah, I also wrote down institutional independence because just like with the executive and the legislative and the judicial part of a government, a central bank should be independent. It should be independent from national governments. It also should be independent from the European Commission. This is something delegates tend to forget in econ committees, but yeah, since you guys are not chairing econ, I guess I might as well shut up with my niche economics knowledge. I'm sorry, I'm an economics student. I love this. And I also love her. She's Christine Lagarde. She's the head of the European Central Bank at the moment. Which leaves me to, well, two last institutions. So the first one of the two last is yet another council. So we already had the Council of the European Union, which was the Council of Ministers. We have the Council of Europe, which is the non-EU council, let's say. And then there's the European Council. The European Council is not that important in EYP. It's mainly I put it in here so you know what it is and you make sure to not confuse it with other councils if you do research. But it is essentially just gathering all the head of governments from all the member states. So it's just Macron, Merkel, Draghi, all of these folks in one room. And yeah, they're not part of the legislative process, but once in a while they meet up to have a cup of tea and decide where the EU is going. They're essentially just agreeing on a general political direction because, you know, they're the elected heads of their countries. So if they meet and they agree on things, then usually it's kind of matching with what everyone in the EU wants. So yeah, that's the European Council. The guy on the right is Charles Michel. Yeah, I found the picture funny. He has a big nose. Okay, last but not least, before we come to an end, which I think is also still quite important for doing research, for finding out what's hot on your topic, the Director Generals. So I've already emphasized like 4 times how important the Commission is, and the Director Generals are basically subunits of the Commission. So if you think of the European Commission as the government of the EU, then you would think of the Directorates General as the ministries. So they're kind of the little administrative units which occupy themselves with one specific field of legislation. You know, they are the ones who actually delve deeper than those 27 commissioners who are just sitting there vibing. But in the Directorate Generals, that's where the actual work happens. That's where you really get down to the topic. That's also where the main main work of the commission is done. So that's where the actual drafts are coming from. Yeah, as I said, it's comparable to the ministries. So if the EU executes its right to draft some legislation on I don't know what, the Directorate Generals are the ones who are proposing these ideas and who are coming up with a proper draft of what should be done. Yeah, I think I've left this link here, which is showing you all the different Directorate Generals. So there's a Directorate General on culture, on not on education, on the economy, on finance, on, I don't know, all these different kinds of topics. They all have their own Directorate General, just like there are different ministries. And you can find a list of them down here. Yeah, so going back to the big picture, I would say the big picture is the EU can appear very complex at times, but essentially, I think everything that you need during an EYP session is on this board. And as long as you are aware of who has the main competence in your topic, you will be able to tell your delegates who is responsible for what. So keep that in mind. I think that is really the most important thing. That's also why I wanted to start with it. But in general, if you forget about the details of the legislative process, no worries. If the sheer amount of councils is confusing at times, also no worries. But if you're ever desperately looking for some kind of actor and you don't know where to look, well, you can have a look at this board. You can try to figure out where your action should happen, and then maybe this is making things easier for you. So after just half an hour of my allocated hour, I think this was it. So are there any questions?
Not a question, but I confuse these councils. So there's like Council of Ministers. There's Council of EU with 47 members. No, Council of EU was the Vismerkio, right?
No.
What about the 47 members was the one?
Council of Ministers.
It's Council
of Europe, which is the 47 members.
Yeah, Council of Europe and
European Council.
European Council, okay.
Yeah, European Council is the one with the heads of government.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, too many councils. They should have come up with more innovative names. I agree.
Yes, please. I remember when we were writing to you also, we were like, okay, well, which one is who? Like, what? Yeah. Thank you for explaining.
I'm gonna stop screen sharing and I'm gonna stop the recording.